Today I'm going to talk about institutionalism and bureaucracy. Recently, I saw a snippet of a talk between two devotees in which one of my godbrothers was quite forcefully asserting that Srila Prabhupada, he wasn't constrained by rules. It's not all about rules. Srila Prabhupada dealt with us all as individuals. He would see the particular instance and the need of the individual and so on. I'm paraphrasing, of course. I disagreed with that. Srila Prabhupada didn't deal with me as an individual. How could he? I was one of thousands of disciples. I hardly saw Srila Prabhupada a few times in classes. How can you deal with literally thousands of people individually? It's impossible. Therefore, Srila Prabhupada, he made a structure. Even when he was at the stage of being able to deal with all his disciples individually, because they were in one place and there were only a few of them, he foresightedly made a structure. He gave the framework, he gave the name the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, and as it developed, he increasingly instructed in the particulars various leaders, and then he formed the GBC body they're supposed to report to him. First of all, he made the system the temple presidents. There's supposed to be three in the temple president, the secretary, and the accountant. And these three were supposed to oversee the management of the temple. The temple presidents were supposed to make reports, first of all to Srila Prabhupada, monthly reports, I believe it was. And then later, as the movement grew more and more, Srila Prabhupada divided the world into 12 zones originally. And then the GBC members were to report to him, not the temple presidents directly. And of course, it wasn't that Srila Prabhupada isolated himself in some ivory tower, but he did make systems for dealing with a burgeoning movement. And there were rules. There were rules for remaining with it. If one wanted to be a full-time member of the movement, then there were rules that he had to follow. There were rules for taking initiation. It wasn't that Srila Prabhupada, he made individual agendas for each individual coming to the movement. So Srila Prabhupada was definitely very personal. He was also very pragmatic. He dealt with individuals personally as he met them, but he didn't attempt to deal with thousands of individuals personally. He set rules, he had structures, he wanted a very organized movement. Very organized. Yeah, he said when a member of the Siddha Swarupananda group, who they were into, it's all love and we don't want all this organized religion. When Srila Prabhupada was asked by one of their members about organized religion, Srila Prabhupada says, yes, we must be very organized. This is recounted in Satsvarup Das Goswami's book, Life with the Perfect Master. He said we should be very organized. And we see that Srila Prabhupada did organize in so many ways, in so many aspects. He was overseeing the organization of what he called this great institution, referring to ISKCON in all aspects. The organizational structure, I already mentioned that there were temples with presidents, secretaries, and accountants, and above that were GBCs. The GBC body were supposed to meet once a year and to make regular reports to him, to Srila Prabhupada. There was the organizational structure. Srila Prabhupada was very concerned with the legal setup of the movement. He personally oversaw and reviewed the incorporation papers for ISKCON in the first branch in New York City and in India. And then the Bhaktivedanta Book Trust, he also oversaw the setting up of that. So in other words, Srila Prabhupada is he was very much concerned that ISKCON be well organized so as to function smoothly, not at the expense of individuals. But this whole idea that we don't like organized religion, is just about feeling what you feel in your heart, feeling spiritual. Well, feelings can mislead, and in fact, we have been misled by our feelings birth after birth after birth. The process of sadhana bhakti, as given by Srila Rupa Goswami, is supposed to channel our feelings toward Krishna in a regulated manner. Srila Prabhupada spoke about the rules and regulations. He repeatedly emphasized 16 rounds, 4 regulated principles, rise early, Mangalati, read my books. He even wrote, it's right there in Bhagavad Gita as it is purport, he wrote of discharging duties as if in military discipline. Whoa! That doesn't sound like very spiritual, does it? Military discipline? Well, of course, the whole Bhagavad Gita is the main guidebook for all of human society for spiritual life, and it's in a military, in a martial setting. Now, it wasn't that Srila Prabhupada downplayed individualism. In fact, his whole teaching and preaching was to emphasize that we are all eternally individual living beings with our own individual relationship with Krishna. Krishna consciousness means personalism. And the aim of all this structure and organization of ISKCON is to make all the individual participants within it into pure devotees, or to be more precise, to revive all of the participants' natural, individual, swarasiki siddhi, their own personal mood of loving devotion to Radha and Krishna. Or, if the devotee is thus inclined, to Rukmini and Krishna, or to Sita and Rama, Lakshmi Narayana, Lakshmi Narasimha. It's meant for reviving our Krishna consciousness. There is a system for doing so, as I mentioned. So that system is given by Krishna himself through Rupa Goswami, through Srila Prabhupada. So the paradox or the catch is to keep the institution working very efficiently so that it works to bring all individuals within it up on the path back home, back to Godhead, and very efficiently for preaching all over the world. We have, if we're going to be an efficient organization, we want to do preaching efficiently. Preaching means heart to heart communication of Krishna consciousness. But organization is required for that also, for setting up new temples, training up newcomers so that they can also become efficient to maximize their Krishna conscious efforts in helping others to become Krishna conscious, for maximizing cooperation, both the spirit of cooperation and the systems by which we can all cooperate better to spread Krishna consciousness. So the whole trick is how to keep the institution efficient. That means cooperation. That means everyone doesn't just act as a rugged individual. It means we don't suppress our individualism, but at the same time we blend our individualism, or we lend our individualism to a group effort. However, there is the tendency, as one of the great founders of the modern Western academic science of sociology, as he analyzed, Max Weber analyzed, and that analysis is still largely accepted up to the present day. It was made over 100 years ago, Max Weber, that there are tendencies of religions to start off with much enthusiasm, usually around a charismatic leader, but later they enter a post-charismatic phase in which the institution becomes more formal, more rigid. Institutionalism sets in. The ideal, the high spiritual ideal, tends to be compromised into a more social, becomes more of a social organization, political constructs within the organization, practical, what we may say, legal, or dealing with the secular authorities all around us. These can tend to take precedence over the spiritual goal. And then the rules and regulations, we become a society run by rules and regulations more than the goal, keep more intent on maintaining the rules and regulations than coming to the actual goal of spirituality. So Weber, he analyzed this, and we could definitely say that ISKCON at the present time is in what Weber would call the post-charismatic phase, with all its attendant problems. Now, Srila Prabhupada, he definitely wanted an organized movement, but at the same time, he was aware of the problems associated with that. And he tried to instill in the leaders who, I suppose naturally, the leaders of Srila Prabhupada, even in the beginning, they thought, we've got to be organized. Okay, we've been put here to organize. Let's organize. What's the best way to organize? Let's look at the corporate structures. How do people do these things? Srila Prabhupada warned against bureaucracy, over-institutionalization. He didn't use that term. Srila Prabhupada didn't want a free-for-all that everyone just does whatever they like. Institutions have to control, to some extent, or maybe to a large extent. Srila Prabhupada instituted that also. You want to stay in this movement? You have to follow 4 regulated principles. If you want to stay in the temple, you have to rise early. You have to chant 16 rounds. So he made these rules. And sometimes, yes, he did make exceptions. But at the same time, he wanted an organization, not a free-for-all. But he did warn against what we would call over-institutionalism, or specifically about bureaucracy and so on. This is an extract. I'm going to read it's quite a long extract from quite a long letter that Srila Prabhupada wrote to Karandara, who was really Srila Prabhupada's most trusted man among the first 12 men he appointed to the GBC. The GBC was new at that time. This is a letter written in 1972. And Srila Prabhupada wrote to him as follows: regarding your points about taxation, corporate status, etc. These are the kind of things that Srila Prabhupada wanted the GBC to look into, he wanted that the GBC look into the legal status of the movement and see that it was on a proper foundation. And he's writing about this. Regarding your points about taxation, corporate status, etc., I have heard from Jayatirtha that you want to make a big plan for centralization of management, taxes, monies, corporate status, bookkeeping, credit, like that, which from the managerial point of view surely seems to make a lot of sense. You have a worldwide organization, there should be some central control, but with you have people far-flung all over the world on various levels of competency. Let the most competent, as in a corporation, let the most competent take the highest position and organize from the top down. Seems to make sense. What does Srila Prabhupada say? I do not at all approve of such a plan. Do not centralize anything. Each temple must remain independent and self-sufficient. That was my plan from the very beginning. Why are you thinking otherwise? Once before you wanted to do something centralizing with your GBC meeting, and if I did not interfere, the whole thing would have been killed. Do not think in this way of big corporation, big credits, centralization. These are all nonsense proposals. The Krishna consciousness movement, Srila Prabhupada continues, is for training men to be independently thoughtful and competent in all types of departments of knowledge and action, not for making bureaucracy. So this is the seemingly inevitable outcome of having an institution, maybe especially a religious institution. Bureaucracy seems inevitable, but Srila Prabhupada writes, bureaucracy means there have to be committees to look into this and that and to recommend, to investigate this and that. Some maybe there's some complaint in some place, send in a committee to check it out, what's going on, make a report. Then there had to be guidelines for such committees to investigate various possibilities, such as environmentally friendly refurbishing of all our temple buildings, for instance, could be checked out on a worldwide scale, or some plan could be made for a worldwide eco-friendlyization of the ISKCON. I'm just something out of the top of my head. So again, you have to make committees, and budget has to be allocated. Where did the funds come from? You have to raise funds, and you have to make rules to tax devotees or whatever to raise the funds, and then you have to have oversight to see that the funds are not misused either through foolishness or malfeasance. So in this way, it seems inevitable that bureaucracy will profligate. But Srila Prabhupada wrote, once there is bureaucracy, the whole thing will be spoiled. There must always be individual striving and work and responsibility, competitive spirit, not that one shall dominate and distribute benefits to the others, and they do nothing but beg from you and you provide. No, never mind there may be botheration to register each center, take tax certificate for each, become separate corporations in each state. That will train men how to do these things, and they shall develop reliability and responsibility. That is the point. Srila Prabhupada wanted organization, but at least in America, he wanted decentralization also. In India, he made one corporate or one trust. He made ISKCON as a charitable trust. He registered in Bombay for the whole of India. But he wanted that devotees, by taking responsibility, would develop their own Krishna consciousness. I am a little observing now, Srila Prabhupada wrote, especially in your country, America, that our men are losing their enthusiasm for spreading on our programs of the Krishna consciousness movement. Otherwise, why are so many letters of problems coming, dissatisfied? That is not a very good sign. The whole problem is that they are not following the regulative principles that I can detect. Just a little interjection here. Srila Prabhupada, by regulative principles, he sometimes referred to the 4 regulative principles: no meat eating, no gambling, no illicit sex, no intoxication. But he also used the term in a broader sense to include following these principles, chanting 16 rounds daily, rising early, having Mangalarti, and so on. So that's what I understand. Yeah, and then, and that's what he will explain just in a few sentences. Without this, without following the regulated principles, Srila Prabhupada writes, enthusiasm will be lacking. Even mechanically following. Mechanically following. Now, mechanically following means you must do it. So on one hand, Srila Prabhupada is talking about individualism in management. On the other hand, he's talking about you have to even mechanically follow the regulative principles, the process which he'll describe. And if he gets gradually understanding from the class, he will come to the point of spontaneous enthusiasm. So that's the aim of the Krishna consciousness movement, for its the individual members to come to the platform of spontaneous, loving, devotional service. And Srila Prabhupada says that they'll get that by following this process. This spontaneous, loving, devotional service is not such an easy matter, but if one sticks strictly to the rules and regulations, like rising early, chanting 16 rounds, chanting Gayatri, keeping always clean, then his enthusiasm will grow more and more, and if there is also patience and determination, one day he will come to the platform of spontaneous devotion. Then his life will be perfect. All of this I have told you in the nectar of devotion. So I do not think the leaders are themselves following. Now, again, I don't think Srila Prabhupada here is. It doesn't seem that Srila Prabhupada is saying that the leaders are breaking the 4 regulated principles, but Srila Prabhupada detects that they're lax in the matter of the temple programs. I do not think the leaders are themselves following, nor are they seeing that the others are following strictly. That must be rectified at once. Each center remain independent, that's all right, but the president and other officers must themselves follow and see that the others are following the regulated principles carefully and giving them good instruction so that they may understand nicely why this tapasya is necessary. And GBC and sannyasis will travel and see that the officers are doing this, and if they observe any lowering of the standard, they must reform and advise, or if there is some discrepancy, I shall remove it. So that's the difference, isn't it, between Srila Prabhupada's personal presence and his non-personal presence. It's not exactly the same as the Ritvigvadis would try to have us believe, because Srila Prabhupada is not personally present to remove discrepancies, as he was previously. Now, Srila Prabhupada wrote, and this is a very telling statement, I want to see a few sincere devotees, not many false devotees or pretenders. So my point is that the regulated principles must be followed by everyone, otherwise their enthusiasm dwindles, and they again think of sex and become restless and so many problems are there. There is some symptom of missing the point. When we become overly bureaucratic, we tend to miss the point. And what is the point? Srila Prabhupada says the point is to be engaged in doing something for Krishna. Never mind what is that job, but being so engaged in doing something very much satisfying to the devotee that he remains always enthusiastic. He will automatically follow the regulative principles because they are part of his occupational duty. By applying them practically as his occupational duty, he realizes the happy result of the regulative principles. So the future of this Krishna conscious movement is very bright. So long the managers remain vigilant that 16 rounds are being chanted by everyone without fail, that they are all rising before 4 in the morning, attending Mangalarti, our leaders shall be careful not to kill the spirit of enthusiastic service, which is individual and spontaneous and voluntary. Now this might appear to be a bit contradictory, because the leaders have to see that everyone is rising before 4 in the morning, attending Mangalarti, and at the same time, be careful not to kill the spirit of enthusiastic service, which is individual and spontaneous and voluntary. And someone may say, well, I don't feel so enthusiastic that I voluntarily want to rise before 4 in the morning, so why are you forcing me? But as Srila Prabhupada explains later in the letter, I'm not going to read all of that, that people before joining our temples should be convinced of the necessity of Krishna consciousness, whereby they voluntarily agree to join the temple and follow the discipline, including rising early. They, the leaders, should try always to generate some atmosphere of fresh challenge to the devotees, so that they will agree enthusiastically to rise and meet it. That is the art of management, to draw out the spontaneous loving spirit of sacrificing some energy for Krishna. But where are so many expert managers? All of us should become expert managers and preachers. We should not be very much after comforts and become complacent or self-contented. Another bane of institutions, that the dynamic spirit in the charismatic phase dies down in the post-charismatic phase after the passing away of the leader, and that usually the dynamic phase continues for some time. And then we become concerned with making facility. We say we have to make facilities for the devotees. There should be proper devotee care, proper facilities, and then we become so much concerned with the facilities that the real devotee care, how they're willing to accept discomfort and austerities for the sake of serving Krishna, that becomes lost, or even the spirit of accepting difficulties for the service of Krishna becomes lost as we mechanically just follow some process that we set into a routine, and we become, as Srila Prabhupada writes here, complacent or self-contented. So on one hand, Srila Prabhupada is talking about follow the program. Even mechanically following, that will lead to the perfection of spontaneous enthusiasm to serve Krishna. But on the other hand, he's warning about becoming complacent or self-contented. And the key point Srila Prabhupada wrote here is that in the classes should be such that they invoke that spirit of wanting to sacrifice and give everything to Krishna. Srila Prabhupada writes, there must be always some tapasya, strictly observing the regulative principles. The Krishna conscious movement must be always a challenge, a great achievement to be gained by voluntary desire to do it, and that will keep it healthy. How can the movement remain healthy? The Krishna conscious movement must be always a challenge, a challenge to come up in Krishna consciousness, to thrive in Krishna consciousness. So you big managers now try to train up more and more some competent preachers and managers like yourself. And Srila Prabhupada finished this section of the letter saying, forget this centralizing and bureaucracy. It's a very strong message. Forget this centralizing and bureaucracy. On the one hand, Srila Prabhupada is telling the leaders, notice that Srila Prabhupada refers to competent preachers and managers like yourselves. He recognizes that the devotees on the GBC are competent preachers and managers. And he wants more competent preachers and managers, which means training, for which we may have training systems. It might seem to make more sense if we're going to train devotees, well, we have centralized training. But Srila Prabhupada says, forget this centralizing, and bureaucracy. So on the one hand, we are to be very organized. On the other hand, not bureaucratic, not institutionalized in the negative sense of the term. Where do we go with all of this? Well, what I'm discussing could be discussed back and forward, in and out, up and down, has been and is going on discussions about this. So many devotees, they just think, well, what do we need to discuss all this for? What do we need any ISKCON for? What do we need any GBC for? And just, we can go on with our spiritual lives. They think like that. Srila Prabhupada wanted ISKCON to be a great success, but at the same time, he did not discount the possibility of his followers just messing everything up after his departure. Right in his Bhagavatam purports, he warned that disorder is to be expected after the disappearance of the Acharya. Yet he gave the antidote also. He is prophetic in the sense that at nighttime you can say the sun will rise. The sun, it won't remain dark like this, the sun will rise. Well, that's not really prophetic, it's just a pattern that it happens regularly, so we can expect it. So in the same way, Srila Prabhupada prophesied, and it seems to be a pattern that we can expect, that after the Acharya disappears, there will be disorder. But Srila Prabhupada also gave the antidote. So please listen, I'm reading from a purport to Srila Prabhupada's rendition of the 4th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. Srila Prabhupada writes, whenever an Acharya comes, following the superior orders of the Supreme Personality of Godhead or his representative, he establishes the principles of religion as enunciated in Bhagavad Gita. Unfortunately, when the Acharya disappears, rogues and non-devotees take advantage and in the guise of swamis, yogis, philanthropists, welfare workers, and so on, immediately begin to introduce unauthorized principles. The main business of human society is to think of the Supreme Personality of Godhead at all times, to become his devotees, to worship the Supreme Lord, and to bow down before him. The Acharya, the authorized representative of the Supreme Lord, establishes these principles, but when he disappears, things once again become disordered. So there's the prediction. And the antidote comes next. The perfect disciples of the Acharya try to relieve the situation by sincerely following the instructions of the spiritual master. Hare Krishna. A lot to think about, no doubt, as this glorious movement that Srila Prabhupada founded continues to go through rough waters, continues to do wonderful things, and at the same time do many things which we can quite confidently say that are not what Srila Prabhupada wanted, and cause disappointment to devotees. So a lot to think about. Leaders have to think about these things, and at the same time, Srila Prabhupada, he didn't sit around discussing all these things on and on and on. He got on with the business. He got on with life. He was the Acharya. He get on with life means he was dynamic and active in spreading Krishna consciousness, and expected his disciples, especially the leaders, to carry the movement on and up. The leadership is so important, even in any organization. If the leadership is good, then contingent upon all other conditions, we can expect the organization to flourish. It's not only good leadership, you have to have good followers also, but one symptom of good leaders is that they will gather around them good followers also, which what Srila Prabhupada is talking about in this letter that I quoted. A bad leader or leaders can make life hellish for those they lead. And look at the situation in the world today with all the politicians, because they don't have proper knowledge about what they're supposed to be doing in leading society. The whole society is pandemonium. Pandemonium. So in the Krishna conscious movement also, the leadership good leadership can make the movement flourish, and poor leadership can make it diminish. And that is the history of religions, that they tend to grow, to flourish when there's good leadership, and they go through crises when there's bad leadership. That's a simplistic but relevant assessment of the history of religions. And we can study the Catholic Church. Apparently Srila Prabhupada said to study the Catholic Church for its structure and everything. Very well organized, which has been a major factor in its surviving for so many centuries and expanding. Very well organized, has been through many crises and keeps on going. So we can expect in the Krishna conscious movement also that it will go through many crises. We live in a bad age, but how it keeps on going, that will depend a lot on the leadership. And specifically, Srila Prabhupada, in this letter, he gave so many letters and so many personal instructions to leaders, but in this letter, Srila Prabhupada is warning about bureaucracy and about what we would call institutionalism. Really the point is that leaders have to be expert managers, that's the term that Srila Prabhupada used, and preachers. Prabhupada wrote, I'm quoting again from that letter, all of us should become expert managers and preachers. So that is required. And the leaders should be themselves very strongly spiritually focused by following all the programs, and by being selfless. That is the challenge. Srila Prabhupada wrote in this letter about the challenge, that the leaders should give challenge to devotees, challenges, so that they can become strong in Krishna consciousness and enthusiastic by accepting the challenge. And it's a great challenge to leaders to not become, as Srila Prabhupada wrote here, complacent or self-contented. So, just some points. I'm often giving talks on the institution that is ISKCON because I'm concerned with it, and I believe it should be a matter that is not just confined to leaders' meetings. They discuss behind closed doors, all these, if at all they discuss these things. But it is a matter of concern when we see even very junior devotees can understand that something is rotten in the state of Denmark, or it's not the movement what it says it should be is not. It's not actually what it is. So I'll go on giving talks like this, and I hope devotees can, by thinking about these topics, adjust their minds so that they can go on in Krishna consciousness enthusiastically and not be discouraged unnecessarily by institutional shenanigans. And well, that's the real point, that we are facing various crises, and it is difficult for many devotees, including myself, to come to terms with these things. But referring to Srila Prabhupada's instructions, how we should be concerned with the movement that he strived so much to establish, be concerned with it, and at the same time to keep always in the center of our lives Krishna and Krishna consciousness, and to strive as far as possible, it may not be within our capability, as far as possible, to keep the whole movement of Krishna consciousness focused on Krishna and Krishna consciousness. Otherwise, it's just the Krishna conscious movement in name only. Hare Krishna. Vancha kalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya evacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Dante nithaya chunakang padaya nipatya kridvacha kakushatamaitaraham bravime. Hey sadhava sakala eva vihaya duranga ranga chandra charane kuruta.